Imagine a world where kings and queens played a deadly game of chess, with the lives of their people as the pawns. This is the 14th century, a time of war, plague, and intrigue. In the midst of this chaos, we find a story of hostages, broken promises, and a king who voluntarily returned to captivity. It's a tale that might sound like a fantasy, but it's all too real. In 1362, a group of royal dukes and nobles found themselves in a dire situation. They were hostages, held in England as part of a peace treaty after a devastating defeat at the Battle of Poitiers. The ransom for their freedom was supposed to be paid in installments, but the money was slow in coming. The territories they had promised to cede to England were also a source of conflict. As a result, their exile stretched on, with no end in sight. They were supposed to be released in fixed numbers every 6 months, but that plan fell apart. Few nobles were willing to take their place, and King Edward III of England made things even more difficult by rejecting the names proposed. 4 royal dukes, who had expected to be freed a year earlier, decided to take matters into their own hands. They negotiated a private treaty with Edward, promising to pay 200,000 florins and additional territories in exchange for their freedom, and that of 6 other hostages. They agreed to stay in Calais on parole, until the terms were fulfilled. Edward, always eager for a little extra, was willing to let them go on these terms. However, King Jean II of France, the father of the hostages, refused to consent unless his own chosen nobles were released instead. This led to a deadlock, and the royal dukes remained in England, except for Enguerrand de Coucy, who stayed behind. The situation took a dramatic turn when King Jean himself, who had been freed earlier as part of the ransom agreement, voluntarily returned to captivity in England. This might seem like a bizarre decision, but it was rooted in a complex mix of honor, duty, and personal struggle. King Jean, who had already suffered a crushing defeat at Poitiers and seen his country ravaged by war and the Black Death, was a man burdened by the weight of his failures. He had promised to raise the ransom for his own freedom and that of his hostages, but he had failed. His son, the Duc d'Anjou, had also broken his parole, further tarnishing the family's honor. King Jean's return to captivity was seen as a noble act by some, but to others it was a puzzling and self-destructive move. His counselors and the barons of France tried to dissuade him, warning that it was a great folly. But Jean was determined, saying that if good faith and honor were to be banished from the rest of the world, they should still be found in the hearts and words of princes. He left France in the middle of winter, crossed the Channel, and arrived in London in January 1364. Despite the lavish entertainments and processions, Jean fell ill with an unknown malady and died in April of the same year at the age of 45. King Jean's death left the remaining hostages in a precarious position. The 1,000,000 florins still owed on his ransom meant that they were not yet free. Some used the safe conducts given to them from time to time and did not return, despite repeated summonses. Others bought their freedom from Edward by ceding parts of their territories. Enguerrand de Coucy, who had been left behind, was eventually released under special circumstances in 1365. One of the hostages, Isabella of England, the eldest daughter of King Edward III, had a story of her own. Isabella was a favorite of her father, but her life had been marked by a series of failed marriage negotiations. At the age of 33, she was still unmarried and living independently, an overindulged and extravagant princess. Her early life had been one of luxury and privilege. As a baby, she had been given a state cradle lined with 670 skins and a robe of Lucca silk. Her childhood was spent in a household filled with servants, musicians, and elaborate clothing. She and her siblings were served on silver, slept on silk-upholstered beds, and had wardrobes that were replenished for every major holiday. Isabella's favored position was evident from a young age. At 12, she had 7 ladies-in-waiting, compared to her sister Joanna's 3. Despite the Black Death, which devastated Europe, the court continued to hold elaborate ceremonies and tournaments. Isabella and Joanna even attended a tournament during the height of the plague, wearing masks to protect themselves. The material life of the 14th century was one of opulence, with every detail of court life meticulously recorded in the royal accounts. Isabella's life, however, was not without its challenges. Her marriage negotiations had been a series of disappointments. Her first proposed match was with Pedro, the son of the King of Castile, who later became known as Pedro the Cruel. Another proposed marriage to the son of the Duke of Brabant fell through due to consanguinity, and a third match with the future Emperor Charles IV of Bohemia also failed. The most dramatic episode came when Isabella was betrothed to Louis of Flanders, but he jilted her at the altar. In 1351, at the age of 19, Isabella was betrothed to Berard d'Albret, the son of a powerful Gascon lord. The marriage was meant to strengthen England's hold on Guyenne, but it never came to fruition. King Edward III, who had always been reluctant to let Isabella go, added a provision in the marriage settlement that if anything prevented the marriage, the dowry and annual revenue would revert to Isabella herself. This unusual clause hinted at the king's deep affection for his daughter and his willingness to let her choose her own path. Isabella's life took an unexpected turn in 1365 when she met Enguerrand de Coucy, one of the hostages who had been released. Enguerrand was a nobleman with a reputation as a skilled warrior and a loyal vassal. Despite the age difference, Isabella was 33 and Enguerrand was 25. They fell in love. Their marriage was a significant event, as it brought together two powerful families and helped to solidify the English hold on the territories in France. The wedding took place in 1365, and Isabella moved to France to live with Enguerrand. Their marriage was not without its challenges. Enguerrand was often away on military campaigns, and Isabella found herself in a foreign land, far from the luxury and familiarity of the English court. However, their love for each other endured, and they had several children together. Isabella's life in France was a far cry from her indulgent existence in England, but she adapted and became a respected figure in the French court. The story of the hostages and the extraordinary decision of King Jean to return to captivity is a testament to the complex and often contradictory nature of medieval politics and personal honor. It is a tale of human tragedy and resilience, where the actions of a few individuals had far-reaching consequences for an entire kingdom. In the end, the fate of the hostages, the honor of a king, and the life of a princess all intertwined in a web of loyalty, duty, and love.